The Chicago Cubs baseball analyst, Jim D.S., is killing me. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I was watching my beloved Cubs play against the Cincinnati Reds on Marquee Sports. Jim D.S., who spent most of his career as a player with the Houston Astros, was talking about the value of spending quality time with kids in the stands at the historic Wrigley Field during a pause in the game. Quality time with kids is something that has become a real concept nowadays, he said, and I knew I wasn't the only one who looked forward to seeing kids in the crowd during these moments. Everything was going well. The Cubs were leading 7-2 in the fifth inning before the game paused for a Reds pitching change. At that moment, my wife, who I've been married to for 6 years, walked into the room with another beer for me and a glass of wine for herself. I stopped watching the game and looked at her. Sorry, JD, but no adorable baby can hold a candle to the sight of my wife in tight denim shorts and a snug t-shirt. Quality time with kids, huh? My wife asked, glancing at the big screen. Yes, but it's still not as good as quality time with my wife, I said, as she gave me a shy smile and sat down across from me on the couch. You men are so predictable, she said with a laugh, lightly shrugging her shoulders. We sat quietly and watched the Cubs play for 2 more innings before Vivian decided a commercial break was the perfect time to talk. Well, why don't we go to Chicago next weekend and do a few things? Maybe we can start working on having some quality baby-making time, Vivian said cheerfully. You could go to the Cubs game, and I could go shopping or something. I picked up on the tone in Vivian's voice when she said, or something, and glanced at her out of the corner of my eye. Would you like to come to the game with me? Do I have a choice or something? I asked innocently, feeling her body tense slightly beside mine. Well, I thought this weekend could be a good time for each of us to do something on our own before we have the throw the birth control pills away party and start our family, she said with a radiant smile and shining blue eyes. She had a way of looking at me that I could hardly resist, especially when she dazzled me with her smile. She had been looking at me like that for the past 8 years, 6 of them as my wife. Yet, something about this didn't sit right with me. I didn't outright dismiss her plan, but I also didn't give it a wholehearted approval. Sure, we'll work something out. Let's go to Chicago, I said decisively. Let's both take Friday off and come back Thursday night. I'll make some plans, leave it to me, Vivian said enthusiastically. It was a small blip on the radar, and I didn't think much of it until Friday night in our hotel room. I turned on ESPN on the TV. We had lunch at a local diner and visited the Shed Aquarium earlier. So, what else? I asked Vivian, trying to figure out what she planned to wear that night. She didn't respond immediately. I looked from the TV to my wife and thought I saw her shudder for a moment. Well, tomorrow's the Cubs game against the St. Louis Cardinals. I thought you'd enjoy sitting right behind the Cubs dugout near third base. You can eat and drink there, Vivian said. As for me, I'll be heading out for drinks and dancing at one of the city's most prestigious clubs. I'm not sure when I'll be back, and I probably won't spend much time here on Saturday. Wait. Are you serious? I'm not letting you roam Chicago alone for 2 nights and a day while I practically shouted. And our vows, Vivian looked at me like a child who needed an explanation. That part of the evaluation wasn't entirely wrong. We've been talking about having kids when we're 30 ever since before we got married, right? Well, here we are, but I figured that since I'm the one who's going to do most of the work, I should get a bonus from the deal. Bonus? Seriously? I don't recall there being an extra clause in our marriage vows, I grumbled. I won't be the one carrying this baby for 9 months. I won't be the one sacrificing their toned body. I won't be the one putting their career on pause for a few years to stay home and raise the baby. But I'll be the one working hard to put food on the table and a roof over our heads, I continued, missing out on the great stuff like hearing the baby's first words. Isn't that worth something? I asked, frustrated, but she simply ignored my concern as if it didn't matter. We've been together for 8 years. In all that time, have I ever given you a reason to doubt my love for you or my faithfulness? She asked. The answer was no, never. So, I want something just for me. A bonus. One night away. Not a whole weekend, just a day and a half. After that, you and I will throw out the birth control pills and it will be just you and me forever, she said. I scoffed. I hear a lot of me. Is there an us in this equation? If you do this, there won't be an us anymore. You're telling me it will be just you and me forever if I let you do this. But what happens the next time we decide to have a baby? Will it be the same thing again? This isn't happening in this lifetime, I said firmly. Do you see any lobotomy scars on my forehead? I didn't ask your permission, she emphasized. I don't need your permission. I'm informing you of what's about to happen. I'm a grown woman, and I decide who I share my body with. This won't affect who we are once you get over your ego. It's not my ego, sweetheart, I said, choking on my frustration. I'd have to get past your incredible selfishness before I could even start worrying about my ego. Maybe I should go out and have fun, like you, I snapped. She looked as if I had slapped her. The arrogance she'd displayed moments earlier disappeared, and suddenly she didn't seem so confident. She reached for her phone and sent me the message with my ticket to the Cubs game that evening. You take the car, and I'll get an Uber to wherever I'm going, she said, apparently realizing that I wasn't the kind of person to tolerate this. I shook my head in exasperation, grabbed my keys and phone, and walked out of the room without looking back. She probably thought I was heading to the baseball game like a compliant fool, but instead of watching the Cubs live, I listened to the game on the radio as I drove home. Pat Hughes and the team were ecstatic as the Cubs won another game. I didn't have a real plan beyond getting away from Vivian. It's devastating when your perception of someone doesn't align with reality. Vivian Langer had worked as a teller at my bank when I went to cash my first paycheck from the national trucking firm I'd just joined. She had only been working at the bank for 2 weeks, having recently graduated with a degree in finance. I was third in line, giving me time to notice the petite blonde with green eyes. She seemed able to carry on brief conversations with her customers while efficiently completing their transactions. When it was my turn at her window, she smiled brightly and said, "You know, your employer can deposit your check electronically, so you don't have to stand in line every Friday." I already knew this because the company's payroll manager had told me when I was hired, but I was the kind of old-school guy who liked having a physical check in my hands. As a kid, I worked summers for my dad, who didn't use electronic funds, so I was used to cashing my checks. "Yeah, but if I did that, I wouldn't have a reason to come see you, Vivian," I said quickly, glancing at her nameplate. She blushed adorably and then gave me a 1,000-watt smile as she bit her lower lip. I realized then that she was also showing interest in me. For the next 2 weeks, I deliberately chose her line, even when another teller's line was open. The other teller once called me over, but I just smiled and pointed to Vivian. The teller immediately understood and nodded. I like to think of myself as calm and rational, but I'm not shy with women either. The following week, I asked Vivian out on a date, and she accepted. Vivian turned out to be sociable and intelligent. She came from a fairly wealthy family, and her parents still partially funded her lifestyle. When I met her parents, I learned that her father, a well-known lawyer in our city, paid special attention to his youngest and only daughter. I realized that what Vivian wanted, she generally got if her dad's money or influence could achieve it. I was on my way to big things at Bishop Enterprises, which pleased both Vivian and her parents. As our relationship progressed, John Langer made it clear that he expected me to maintain the lifestyle his daughter was accustomed to. "Kinsey, be kind to my daughter and do right by her and her mother, and I'll treat you like one of the family. But if you treat her poorly or, God forbid, ever lay a hand on her, you'll have me as a lifelong enemy, along with plenty of friends," John Langer told me. Yes, Kinsey is my real name. That's why Vivian and almost everyone who knows me calls me Q. It's a family name. Every firstborn son in the Navarro family for the past 4 generations has been named Kinsey. My uncle is still alive, so my parents sometimes call me For. Vivian's parents are the exception to this rule. Everyone else in the Langer family calls me Q, except for John and Barbara. 20 months after our first date, Vivian and I got married in a grand ceremony that surprised both me and my parents. The master of ceremonies was a state judge, and one of our guests was a U.S. senator whom Vivian affectionately called Uncle Shem. Before we got married, Vivian and I agreed to postpone having children until we were 30, so we could focus on our careers and finances. Her 30th birthday was 2 weeks before our weekend in Chicago. By midnight, I had packed 2 suitcases, and the trunk of my car was loaded with most of my valuables. I called my younger brother Bill, and he agreed to let me stay at his house, an hour's drive away, for a couple of days while I figured out my life. He and his wife promised not to tell anyone I was there, even if it meant lying to my wife, who likely hadn't yet realized I'd left Chicago. I was sure Vivian's mind was still on her boyfriend, and that she'd figure it all out by Sunday morning at the latest, when we were supposed to return home. That night, I barely slept, replaying everything in my head. What had I done to make Vivian suddenly believe she needed to be with another man, or 2, and that I would actually accept it? The closest conclusion I could come to was that, because I tried to give her almost everything she wanted, she considered me weak or submissive. She had tragically miscalculated. On Saturday morning, I took care of some financial tasks that suddenly felt far more important, canceling all our joint credit cards and transferring half of our savings into an account solely in my name. I had no idea if Vivian returned to our hotel room on Saturday and then left again without noticing my absence, or if she stayed out the entire time from Friday night to Sunday morning. I didn't receive my first message from her until around 9 a.m. on Sunday. "Where are you? We need to check out before 11. I showed the message to my brother, and we laughed as we sipped margaritas on his back porch. He got up to check on the sausages frying for our brunch, while my wonderful sister-in-law was in the kitchen making homemade potato salad. There's nothing better than the comfort of family when your life is falling apart. A second message, saying nearly the same thing, arrived 30 minutes later, quickly followed by several voice messages in increasingly upset tones. Her voicemail at 10 a.m. reminded me she had no way to get home since I had driven her to Chicago. Her next voicemail was angry and threatening, followed by a pleading tone as she apparently tried to extend her stay at the hotel, only to discover that 2 of her credit cards had been canceled. Those margaritas were delicious. "You're not hoping to reconcile with that idiot, are you?" my sister-in-law Sharon asked. "You two seem to have a good marriage, and I know you still love her. I would do anything for her, and I know this won't be solved quickly. But the way she did it tells me that, at best, I'm second on her list of people she loves, after herself," I said. Around 5 p.m. As we were still sitting on the porch after several more margaritas, my brother's phone rang. He showed me the caller ID and raised his eyebrows, giving me the chance to answer if I wanted to. "No," I said. He passed the phone to Sharon, who was still relatively sober, at least compared to Bill and me. "Hi, Vivian," Sharon answered. "I'm taking Bill's call because the drunk here doesn't have the guts to answer himself." "Yes, we know what happened." "No, we don't know where he is." "How could you do that to the best guy in the world, Viv?" Sharon asked. I could only imagine what Vivian was saying on the other end. Sharon rolled her eyes a couple of times and frowned once. She said, "Aha," twice and then added, "Good luck, Vivian," before hanging up. "I bought you some time," Sharon said. "No way," I replied. "You're not going to tell me what she said?" "Fine. But I'll tell you what she's probably telling others while she's looking for you," Sharon said, smirking. "Someone, get me another margarita," I said. Bill once again reminded me why I think he's the best brother ever. 8 years ago, I didn't intend to apply for a membership in the single men's club, I muttered. On Monday morning, I ignored my hangover and showed up to work at my usual time, though I wasn't dressed for work. I walked into my boss's office and told him I was either resigning or transferring to another office, effective immediately. "Wow, you're not giving a guy much time to think, huh?" my boss said sarcastically. "What's going on, Q?" I told him everything, including my half-baked plan to disappear for a while. If I'm lucky, it'll take my wife, or more likely, my father-in-law, several months to find me once they start looking. The only thing I ask, besides the transfer, is that my employee record be updated with my second name, Oliver, and that no information about me be disclosed, at least legally. Less than 5 minutes later, my boss agreed. My next job had a spot for me in the Santa Fe, New Mexico, office, and within 30 minutes, Oliver Navarro was officially on his way to a new life. By the time I left, I was no longer employed in Indiana, and technically, I wasn't an employee of Bishop Enterprises anymore either. I started my new job a week later. The company found me a one-bedroom apartment that was comfortable enough for my new life as a single man. I also bought a new phone with a different provider so the phone bill and associated calls wouldn't reach my wife back home. I shared my new number with only a few selected people. 2 people who didn't receive this number were my parents. My brother told me that my mom scolded him for what I did and seemed entirely on Vivian's side. I didn't trust her not to pass my number on to Vivian. My dad was collateral damage in this battle. I knew that if I gave him my number, my mom would eventually wear him down and get it. Then we'd have problems. So no, I didn't involve him. Bill and Sharon, however, had broad shoulders, and I knew my mom could never break them. God knows she tried. Vivian also tried. According to Bill, it took her about a week to realize I wasn't in town anymore. "How can we work things out if we don't talk? If we can't sit down and look each other in the eye?" she asked Bill. "Maybe he doesn't want to work it out, Viv. You broke his heart a little in Chicago," Bill told her. "It was just 2 nights, Bill." "It didn't mean anything," she insisted. "Maybe it meant everything to him," Bill replied. My career in Santa Fe continued without any problems for the next year. My social life, not that I was looking for one, was practically non-existent, and I was fine with that. Occasionally, I'd ask Bill to check if I was still married. Surprisingly, Vivian hadn't filed for divorce. I sometimes wondered why. There were rare evenings when I went out with coworkers after work, but I didn't go on my first date until I'd been living in Santa Fe for about 18 months. As Bob Seger would say, she was a black-haired beauty with big, dark eyes. She was half Pueblo, half Hispanic, with muscular legs that felt wonderful when we danced during our dates. But I knew she was looking for something more permanent, something I couldn't give her. 2 months later, I met Evangeline Angel Byrne while sitting at the bar of my favorite quiet spot. She was a typical Irish woman with brown hair, freckles, and sparkling blue eyes. I later learned she also had the famous Irish temper. I was still in my jacket and tie, having come straight from one of those days at the office spent putting out fires. I was nursing a Jack Daniels and honey when I heard a woman's voice calling out, "The luck of my girls at the bar, everyone will find theirs." As several women entered, I assumed the 4 of them had just finished their shifts at a local factory, given that they were all wearing jeans and work shirts. The one walking toward me moved with a relaxed confidence, her work shirt unbuttoned halfway. I wasn't exactly subtle in noticing her movements as she approached. "What are we drinking tonight, Mr. Fancy Suit?" she asked with a wide smile and sparkling eyes. "Jack and honey," I replied. "Does that work for you, darling?" Angel and I spent the night talking, dancing, and drinking. I learned that she had a rare night of freedom because her 2-year-old daughter was with a babysitter. "Her father is a stranger," she told me with a trace of shame in her voice. I'd had a bit too much to drink that night, and I'm pretty sure 2 guys I was hanging out with spiked my drink, she explained. I learned some lessons that night, the most important being that neither I nor my friends should ever leave a bar alone with a man if we didn't come with him. We all leave together or at least in pairs. But my daughter is a gift from God, she's the most precious thing in my life, Angel added, pulling out her phone. After pressing a few buttons, she showed me a photo of an adorable baby. "Do you have kids?" she asked. "I don't think that'll ever happen for me," I said, beginning to share the story of how I ended up in Santa Fe. "Wow, that's terrible," Angel replied. "But you're still married to her. You should do something about that." "I should have," I admitted. But at that moment, I just wanted to leave quickly. And then there's the matter of reclaiming myself. Angel and I actually went on a few dates as a couple. Soon after, I started joining her and her daughter on family-friendly outings. Eleanor, her 2-year-old, was shy at first, but I read somewhere to get down to a child's level, and whoever wrote that was a genius. Almost immediately, I became Eleanor's favorite adult. Angel told me there were times when we'd be sitting on her couch, cuddling, and Eleanor would grab my hand and tug at me until I got up and sat on the floor. Then she'd crawl into my lap like a puppy and fall asleep. Angel seemed deeply impressed by this, and, to be honest, I was too. Angel and I got along well, but we never discussed exclusivity. Early on, Angel mentioned that she was occasionally seeing someone else. I didn't think Angel and I were in this for the long haul, and since she was honest with me, I had no problem with her other relationship. You know the old saying about assumptions? Well, I simply assumed Angel's other relationship was with a man named Bobby. We never talked about Bobby, just as I assumed she didn't talk about me with him. However, about 3 months into our relationship, she mentioned that she and Bobby had gone clothes shopping a few days prior. Wait, what? I asked. Is Bobby a woman? Bobby? No. Baby. Like, Robert. Well, yes. I guess I didn't mention this before. Baby is a woman. She likes girls, Angel said. Are you sure we've never talked about this before? I shook my head silently. Angel suddenly started looking everywhere but at me, her arms, her feet, the floor. Is this a problem, Oliver? She asked in a near whisper. I had never thought about something like this before. I knew bisexual people, but I'd never dated one. It took me a minute to process this, I said, before realizing that, in our relationship, it didn't matter who the other person was seeing, male or female. I don't think it's a problem. Unless, of course, Baby is really beautiful. Then I'd have a hard time competing. Should I be worried? I asked, half joking. She's cute, but I don't think you need to worry too much. Each brings something different to the table, Angel replied, laughing lightly, which made me laugh too. Are you sure I've never told you I'm bi? I usually try to let all my dates know as soon as possible so I don't mislead anyone or hurt their feelings, Angel said. So now you're wondering what we do when we're out together. You're such a pig, she teased. No, I replied. I never wanted to know what you two were doing together when I thought Bobby was another man. It didn't matter. Now that I know she's a woman, it still doesn't matter. We're not exclusive, and your privacy belongs to you, just as my life belongs to me. So, is she pretty? I tried to keep a straight face, but Angel knew me well enough to catch that I was joking. I'm Eleanor's favorite, right? I asked in a childlike voice. You know it, she replied with a smile. Over time, I essentially became Angel's backup for babysitting Eleanor. I even got written permission to pick up the little girl on the rare occasions Angel worked late. I bought a car seat for my Mustang and installed it permanently since no one else ever sat in the back seat anyway. I didn't overthink it when my phone rang a couple of months later, and the caller ID displayed Bobby Clark's. Angel had never told me Bobby's last name, and there was no real reason for her to call me, except one. My stomach tightened nervously as I answered the call. Over the next few minutes, Bobby, nearly hysterical, told me that Angel had died in a car accident on her way home from work. The police had arrived at the scene, found Angel's phone, and noticed Bobby's name appeared several times in her recent call history. Bobby rushed to the hospital, but Angel had already passed away. When Bobby was able to think clearly for a moment, she realized Eleanor needed to be picked up from her babysitter. Angel had once mentioned to Bobby that I was authorized to do so. We agreed to meet at Angel's apartment after she picked up Eleanor. When I arrived, Bobby was sitting at the kitchen table, crying, with a very confused toddler in her arms. The moment I walked in, she ran to me, holding Eleanor, and hugged us both tightly while continuing to cry. We probably stood there for 5 minutes, 2 adults crying, with a baby squeezed between us in a tight embrace. Finally, we pulled ourselves together when I realized we needed to feed Eleanor and take care of a few things. We pieced together fragments of Angel's life from what she had told us. She was an only child whose parents had passed away, and there didn't seem to be any aunts or uncles in the picture. This meant we had to care for Eleanor until we could figure out which government agencies would take over. Bobby found a couple of cans of tuna and made sandwiches for us, setting some aside in a bowl for Eleanor. After searching the pantry a little more, I found a juice box and some snacks to keep the baby occupied. Bobby and I struggled to come up with a plan for Eleanor. Legally, she was now a ward of the state and would likely be placed in foster care. But neither of us could accept that outcome. We might have been wrong, but we felt that the best thing for the little girl was to stay with one of us for the foreseeable future. If the state doesn't know about her, they won't try to take her and put her in foster care. She can stay with us, I suggested. With you? Bobby asked skeptically. What do you know about raising a child? Honestly, nothing. But I was a child once, I replied. Great. Not exactly the answer I was hoping for, she said with a sigh. We paced around for the next hour, trying to come up with a good plan for Eleanor. In the end, we decided I would give up my apartment, move into Angel's place, and become the primary caregiver for the child, with daycare support. Bobby said she would visit often to help. We were both very aware that neither of us had ever been a parent before. What's that old saying? The blonde leading the blind? Bobby joked, making me laugh for the first time all night. Actually, it's the blind leading the blind, but your version is funnier, I replied with a grin. By the way, I'm Oliver Navarro. It's a pleasure to formally meet you, Bobby, I said, extending my hand for a handshake. She looked at my hand, then into my eyes, bypassed my extended hand, and stepped into my personal space, wrapping me in a tearful hug. God, I'm going to miss her so much, she said. Me too, was all I could manage in response. The next morning, I called my office and explained to my boss that I needed a couple of personal days to sort things out with Eleanor. Bobby and I decided to have Angel's body cremated. It took Eleanor, Bobby, and me a couple of weeks to settle into a routine. Bobby started showing up at the apartment almost every night after work, and we shared cooking responsibilities. I could understand why Angel liked her. She was smart and funny, with a bit of that sass Angel had. She was also tall, blonde, blue-eyed, and very curvy. I enjoyed her company and missed her on the rare nights she didn't come over. Many nights, Bobby and I talked about our feelings for Angel. About 3 months passed when, one night after putting Eleanor to bed, a somewhat flustered Bobby approached me. I was sitting on one end of the 3-seater couch in the living room, and Bobby sat down on the cushion right next to me, her legs tucked beneath her. Most women do this effortlessly, while most men struggle to achieve this position without a solid surface like the floor beneath them. Yes? I asked, drawing the word out in anticipation of something. Oliver, what would you think about getting a bigger apartment and me moving in with you full-time? She asked. It would be better for our finances, and we could share the responsibilities with Eleanor more easily. I love that little girl. And I guess I want to be her mom, more or less, and you could be her dad, more or less. I know you love her too. We don't need to be married to raise a child. In fact, when we're at home, we could even have our own social lives. And since we're friends, not lovers, it should reduce the chances of us falling out. That's fine. You don't have to explain, I said. Just like my wife, Bobby really was a beautiful woman. But since I knew she played for the other team, I never crossed any boundaries. That would have been incredibly rude. Still, I grew fond of her in a different way. We were both deeply in love with Eleanor. The arrangement sounded great to me. Bound by our shared commitment to Eleanor and perhaps because there were no romantic emotions or games involved, the friendship between Bobby and me grew stronger. The three of us became a true family, which became even more evident when Eleanor started calling us Mom and Dad, something she had evidently picked up from the other kids at kindergarten. Who would have thought that two small words could have such a profound impact on two adults? The first time she called me Dad while I was holding her in my arms, my heart nearly burst out of my chest. When she first called Bobby Mom, I thought Bobby was going to fall apart completely. She had just finished tying Eleanor's shoes when Eleanor said, "Thank you, Mommy." Bobby inhaled sharply for a second and then ran to the bathroom so Eleanor wouldn't see her tears. She came out 2 minutes later, still teary-eyed but with a huge smile on her face. "Yes, Mommy. That hurt me too," I told her. She gave me a hard smack on my right hand, smiled, and nodded. Aside from the fact that Bobby and I never engaged in the sweet touches of a husband and wife, I thought we fit well together with the parents of Eleanor's friends at school and at social events. Over the next few years, we told the truth about being single to those who asked and avoided getting involved in stories about Eleanor's birth, steering clear of those conversations altogether. I could have been knocked over with a feather when Vivian, yes, that Vivian, showed up at our door one Saturday morning, about 4 years after I'd left her. Oliver, someone's here to see you," Bobby called from the living room while I was sitting at the kitchen table playing with blocks with Eleanor. Eleanor followed me into the living room, and I wasn't sure who looked more shocked, me or Vivian. "Is she yours?" Vivian asked, staring at Eleanor as if she'd seen a ghost. I had to close my gaping mouth before I could respond. "Well, actually, she's ours," I said, glancing from Bobby to myself. "Ours? She can't be ours." "We're still married," Vivian said, looking like she might collapse onto the floor. I invited her to sit on the couch, and she quickly sat down. "Calm down. Bobby and I aren't married, but Eleanor is still our child," I said. Oh. More or less. "I guess I can live with that," Vivian murmured. "What are you talking about, Vivian? Why are you here after all this time? Aren't we already divorced?" I fired off quickly. To my surprise, I learned that I was still married to Vivian. She had never filed for divorce, believing I would come back to her within the first year. She and her father had searched for me for almost 2 years, and then it took her another year to gather the courage to approach me for reconciliation. Reconciliation? Seriously? Why? Years weren't enough for me to get over how you ripped my heart out and acted like the Wicked Witch of the West. A lifetime wouldn't be enough, I said, my anger barely restrained. "You know I love you." "I always have, and I always will," Vivian said. "I made a mistake, a huge mistake. But it was still just a mistake. I'm sorry for what I did, and I'm sorry for trying to take advantage of your good nature. I thought if I pushed you into a small state of shock, I could overwhelm you, and you wouldn't have another choice but to accept. I also thought you wouldn't give up on having kids and that we'd spend the rest of our lives together. That was a compromise I was willing to make for the sake of one weekend." "You knew me better than anyone," I replied. "You knew how I felt about fidelity, and you flaunted it in my face shamelessly. I will not tolerate such disrespect from anyone, not even from my beloved wife." Vivian looked around the room, her gaze lingering on Bobby and Eleanor for a few seconds. "It seems you got back to reality very quickly," she said. You didn't waste any time at all. By the way, your former boss at home really supported you, she continued. He kept telling Dad's investigators that Kinsey Navarro no longer worked there. When you moved to another office and started using your middle name, Dad finally got a court order to review Bishop Enterprises' employment records. Then he remembered your middle name was Oliver. After that, all I had to do was muster the courage to come to you. Well, you came to me, I said firmly. Even if I were the biggest fool in the world, I have a family now that I would never leave. I have a beautiful woman whom I love and trust with all my heart. She respects me, and I respect her. We have a beautiful daughter who we cherish and will continue to cherish as she grows into a wonderful woman. It's us. I like being part of us. Remember a long time ago when I told you there's no I in team? There's no I in us, I said, my voice rising almost to a shout. For the first time, Vivian looked genuinely remorseful. I quickly glanced at Bobby and Eleanor. Bobby looked surprised, while Eleanor seemed scared. I went over to my girls and hugged them tightly. I looked at my little one and whispered, "Everything will be okay, sweetheart." I understand now, Vivian said softly, watching us. I'll file for divorce on the grounds of abandonment as soon as I get home. I don't need anything from you financially. But it would be crossing the line to ask for your forgiveness for my selfishness. Maybe I can try to forgive myself, but this is the best I can do, for now, at least. Vivian stood up from the couch, gave me a faint smile, and left the apartment, and hopefully my life forever. Bobby sent Eleanor to her room to play, then took my hand and led me to the couch, sitting close enough for our knees to touch. She had the same expression Eleanor had a few minutes ago. "Did you mean what you told your wife a few minutes ago? About us being us?" she asked hesitantly. "Completely," I responded. "I know you and I don't love each other in that way, but I really do love you. I trust you completely, I respect you, and I believe you respect me too. And I know you love us, our little family. Do you understand?" "I understand," Bobby replied simply, smiling brightly. I suppose finally getting a legal divorce should have improved my love life, but I knew I wasn't about to rush out and start dating every decent woman I met. I was never like that before I got married, and now that I had a family, it was an even lower priority. I still had fun occasionally, but I wasn't looking for the next Mrs. Navarro. Bobby, on the other hand, dated more than I did and had a better social life overall. We communicated openly about these things and managed it well for nearly a year. One night, the three of us shared many tears as we showed Eleanor photos of her biological mother and explained Angel's relationship with Bobby and me. We also had to explain that Angel was bisexual and that Bobby liked women. Of course, we also explained our decision not to turn Eleanor over to the state and instead raise her ourselves. So we're not blood family. We're family by love, Bobby concluded. Eleanor was confused and a bit unsettled for a few days as she processed what Bobby and I had told her. She was a smart and mature child for her age, though, and a few days later, she seemed to understand. "You could have let child services take me. Wouldn't that have been easier for both of you?" she asked during dinner one evening. "Doing the right thing isn't always easy," I replied. "I've never regretted my decision, not for a minute. Except maybe for the time you threw up birthday cake on my new suit when you were 6. A teary-eyed Bobby nodded, wiping her nose with a napkin. Bobby and I had a few friends we'd grown close to as a couple, and sometimes she and I went out together with those friends. Bobby loved dancing, so we did that occasionally. She was a better dancer than I was, but I worked hard to keep up. Our friends, most of whom knew we weren't an actual couple, often commented on how good we looked together. Bobby sometimes danced with other friends when we went out, but she never accepted invitations from strangers, for obvious reasons. It didn't matter how attractive someone was, she never lacked attention from men or women. Most men who approached her took her polite rejections well, but not all of them. One night, she had just returned to our table after dancing with one of our friends, John, when a man, about 10 years younger than her, I guessed, decided he had a problem with her turning him down. "Oh, come on, darling. I'm better than that guy you were just dancing with or the guy you're sitting with now. Come on, give me a chance," he demanded, grabbing her wrist and trying to drag her back to the dance floor. I'm 62 and weigh 180 pounds, and at 41 years old, I was still in pretty good shape. No matter what happened, I wasn't going to let anyone treat a friend of mine that way. I grabbed the hand holding Bobby's wrist and twisted it. The man yelped in pain and let go of her. That turned out to be a big mistake on his part. Now free, Bobby turned to him and swiftly brought her right knee up. "Did I mention she played soccer in college?" The man crumpled to the ground, but not before his face hit the edge of the table on the way down. By the time the bar manager and the bouncer arrived at our table, the man was curled up in a fetal position with his face covered in blood. The police were called, and after we all gave statements, we were assured that no charges would be filed against Bobby or me. "I appreciate the help," Bobby said, but the Claren daughters were taught to stand up for themselves. No matter who we were dating, this guy made a big mistake tonight. "I like the way your dad thinks. Let's ask him to teach Eleanor some self-defense moves the next time he and your mom visit," I said. A couple of years ago, we moved into a 5-bedroom house and made some renovations, creating the equivalent of 2 master bedrooms with ensuite bathrooms. We also had a large living room with a built-in snack area, making our home a popular gathering spot for Eleanor and her friends. Bobby and I became de facto parents to several teenagers, and honestly, we both loved it. I learned that Bobby had been dating the same woman for about 2 months when she invited her to dinner with Eleanor and me one Saturday. I realized this woman must be special when Bobby finally kicked me out of the kitchen and cooked what I consider her best dish, veal parmigiana with spaghetti. Visually, Stephanie was truly stunning. If Bobby was an 8 or 9, Stephanie was a 10, big brown eyes, porcelain skin, dark curly shoulder-length hair, and the body of a swimsuit model. "Dad, you should let Mom find you a girlfriend. She's really good at it," Eleanor whispered to me shortly after Stephanie arrived. "Yes, you're definitely right about that, kiddo," I replied. It turned out Stephanie was just as wonderful on the inside as she was on the outside. I liked her, Eleanor quickly adored her, and Bobby was on cloud 9. It was genuinely amazing to see how Bobby's eyes lit up every time Stephanie entered the room. I barely remembered what that felt like, but when I searched my memory, I felt a twinge of jealousy. It took Stephanie some time to adjust to the family dynamic and the incredibly close relationship Bobby and I had developed. We were co-parents of a girl we'd raised since she was 2 years old, and we were much closer than best friends. We talked about everything, from the trivial to the serious. I was surprised when Stephanie called me a few weeks after she started visiting our house regularly and asked if we could meet for lunch, without telling Bobby. I reluctantly agreed. 2 days later, I was sitting in a restaurant when Stephanie walked in. She saw me, made her way to my table, and I noticed the envious looks from several men as she passed. I chuckled to myself, sometimes fantasy is better than reality. After exchanging pleasantries and placing our order, Stephanie wasted no time getting to the point. She explained that she struggled to understand the relationship between Bobby and me and didn't want to get too involved with a woman who might already be in a romantic relationship. She looked genuinely worried, while I couldn't help but smile. Wow. If only beautiful women like Bobby didn't date guys like me, even if they weren't into men. "I'll take that as some kind of compliment," I said. "But you're right, we do have a loving relationship, and it definitely requires some explanation." I spent the next hour explaining everything to her. Both of us returned to work late that day, but by the end of lunch, she understood our family dynamic much better. "Okay, I get it," she said. "I'd love to be part of this family." Bobby and Stephanie got married 6 months later. I walked Bobby down the aisle because her father had passed away a few years earlier. 15-year-old Eleanor was one of the bridesmaids. Eleanor was the spitting image of her late biological mother, with her red hair and blue eyes. I was terrified of being the father of a beautiful teenage girl in high school because I remembered exactly what it was like to be a teenage boy. According to Bobby and Stephanie, I didn't handle it well. You can't threaten high school boys with physical harm just because they kissed your daughter, Bobby said one day after Eleanor went on a date. Did you see his face? You totally freaked him out. He's not going to date her again, Stephanie added. I'm sure one of us can pass along your good wishes to her boyfriends in the future. Yes, they made me apologize. Dad, would you be just as crazy if I decided to date women? Eleanor asked. Probably not, I replied, but then you'd have to deal with Mom and Stephanie. It certainly wouldn't be easier for your date, I pointed out. Eleanor thought about it for a few seconds, and I watched as several emotions crossed her face. As much as I hate to admit it, it could have been worse, she finally said. I laughed and felt better as she left. Is there any phrase a man dreads more than, "we need to talk"? The answer is a definite no. But given my family situation, I was more confused than scared when Bobby said those words to me on a Friday night while Eleanor was with her friends. She directed me to our formal living room, a room we almost exclusively used for guests. Stephanie was already there, looking excited. She handed me a glass of what appeared to be an expensive liquor when I walked in and sat in the recliner. She motioned for me to look at Bobby, who was seated on the couch opposite Stephanie. Both women held glasses of white wine. I felt completely lost. Okay, you've got me, ladies. I sincerely apologize for everything I've done wrong, and I promise it won't happen again, I said earnestly. The two women exchanged confused looks until Bobby finally understood. Relax, Oliver. It's not what you think. But we'll save that apology for the next time you mess up, Bobby laughed. We need a favor, she continued, suddenly hesitant. She looked at me, swallowed hard, and opened her mouth, but no words came out. Finally, Stephanie stepped in. Oliver. Bobby and I would like to have a baby, and we'd like your help. We need your sperm for in vitro fertilization. Would you do that for us? I admit it took me a few seconds to process this. Then I found myself reacting like never before in my life. Oh, yes. I shouted, prompting a wild celebration in the living room as the two women jumped around me like sugar-filled fifth graders. How did you choose me? Why me? I asked once we calmed down and sat back down. They looked at each other with smiles. Choosing you is much easier than asking a stranger, Stephanie said. I know you won't believe this, but we chose you because you're smart, kind, respectful, handsome, and fit, she continued. And you're an amazing father and a good person, Bobby added. It would be incredible if our child inherited some of those great traits. I've only cried a handful of times as an adult, and that day was one of them. I cried like a child. You know, if you want, I could sell you my half of the house so you two could. No, Bobby interrupted. We don't want you to move out. We want you to stay here. We were hoping you'd help us raise our child, just like you helped raise Eleanor. I think we did a pretty good job with that, don't you? I had to admit I thought we'd raised a wonderful daughter, and I'd honestly loved every minute of it. I was slightly concerned about what Stephanie thought, but she must have seen this coming. Studies show that kids adjust best in homes with a mother and a father. Imagine how well this child could adjust with two moms, a dad, and a sister, before Eleanor goes off to college, Stephanie added. I murmured a heartfelt thank you as I continued crying. I love you both, you know that, I managed to say before breaking down entirely. We told Eleanor about our plans that night during dinner. She jumped out of her chair and hugged Bobby and Stephanie. Wow! I'm going to be a big sister. How cool is that? She squealed with excitement. 2 months later, Bobby, Eleanor, and I waited for Stephanie to come out of the bathroom in her bedroom to confirm the news. When she stepped out with tears of joy streaming down her face, we all hugged tightly. On a purely personal level, I had so many emotions running through my head. A little more than 13 years ago, I thought I was doomed to live my life without ever having children. Now, I was just months away from having my second child. Yes, families come in all shapes and configurations. I've always been impressed by Eleanor's intelligence and relative maturity as she's grown. She always seemed able to accept that our family was just a little different from most of her friends' families. She mentioned that she was occasionally teased but never complained. She didn't seem to worry much about Bobby having the wrong orientation, the fact that Bobby and I weren't married, or that the three of us had different last names. Of course, then we added a fourth person with a fourth last name, and later, a fifth person. Although the baby's last name was Stephanie's, we decided to keep Eleanor's last name as it was because it was already on her birth certificate. Eleanor always seemed popular among her classmates, and over the years, she and her friends often spent time at our house, including her teammates from the college soccer team and members of the band. However, adults weren't always as understanding as kids. Occasionally, over the years, we'd hear second-hand comments from other adults. These remarks were rare and kept quiet when we were around, probably because most people didn't want to cross me, or Bobby, known for her sharp tongue when it came to protecting our family. Eleanor became her class president and was chosen to give a speech at graduation. I'm pretty good with words and offered to help, but she told me she'd already had enough input and didn't need more. In fact, she never worked on it with me, Bobby, or Stephanie. Like everyone else, I'd have to wait to hear it during the ceremony. Roman Alexander Ellis, who wasn't even a year old at the time, accompanied Bobby and Stephanie to the gymnasium on graduation day. We were constantly delayed as every woman we passed stopped to admire the baby. Eleanor delivered her speech during the ceremony, and I couldn't help but smile as I read the program and saw her speech titled "There's No I in Team." The essence of her talk was about how teamwork can overcome individual weaknesses and the importance of everyone rowing in the same direction. She used the differences in our family as an example of how 4, now 5, people could form a successful unit. I'm pretty sure I grew an inch taller that day while listening to Eleanor. There were few dry eyes in the room. It was a family trip when we took Eleanor to Arizona State University for her freshman year. We left Santa Fe 5 days earlier and did all kinds of touristy things before saying goodbye. As we prepared to leave, we lined up to give her goodbye hugs. I was the last in line, and thinking about it later, I realized the order wasn't random. "Promise me, Dad, that you'll try to find a good woman," she said softly as the others returned to the car. "I know it wasn't a priority for you while I was home, but now that I'm gone, Mom has a good woman. You need one too." "I'll try, sweetheart, but I can't promise," I replied just as softly. "Good women like Stephanie don't grow on trees, you know." I suppose it was only natural that Roman called me Dad or Daddy when he started talking, and my heart always seemed to swell when he did. What surprised me was that he called both Bobby and Stephanie Mommy. Somehow, they always knew which one he meant. I never noticed any difference in how he pronounced the word, but the two of them could tell. 2 years after graduating from Arizona State, Eleanor gave me the incredible joy of walking her down the aisle to marry her fiancé. This was practically the only thing I had to do at the wedding, as my daughter, Bobby, and Stephanie did all the hard work, smiling and laughing the whole time. I just paid my share and kept 7-year-old Roman out of the way. Jack Lur seemed like a very nice young man, but that didn't stop me from threatening him with bodily harm if he ever laid a hand on my daughter. I told him I would never interfere in their marriage, unless he ever disrespected Eleanor. When he said he understood and agreed, it was in a shaky voice, likely because I had him in a firm one-armed hug during our conversation. "She's my girl, and I just wanted my future son-in-law to understand that actions have consequences," I explained. I may have been over 50, but I was still in good physical shape, going to the gym 3 days a week. The wedding went off without a hitch, and I made sure to enjoy my daughter's big day. I visited every guest table, ate delicious food, drank fine liquor, and danced with several women. I was standing and chatting with some friends when a striking woman with shoulder-length silver hair, streaked with purple highlights, approached me. She grabbed my right arm and dragged me to the dance floor. "Do you have a height requirement for your dance partners, handsome?" she teased, pulling me down closer to her amid the boisterous laughter of those nearby. "In case you were wondering, I'm the aunt of the groom," said the purple-haired elf as we stopped on the dance floor. "I'm also Jack's mom's best friend, and I used to change the diapers of your new son-in-law," she added. "My nephew only had good things to say about you," she continued, "but he also warned me about your deadly touch." She smiled radiantly, showing off perfect teeth and cheerful blue eyes. I gave her what I thought was a subtle once-over, noting her gymnast-like build and strong lower body and legs. The first 2 songs were fast-paced, and she moved her body well. When the third song turned out to be a slow one, I tried to keep a respectable distance, but she clung to me almost immediately. "I can tell someone goes to the gym regularly," she said. Afterward, we walked hand in hand to the bar to grab a drink. I was almost sure she was marking her territory, not that I minded. If that was the case, though, she'd have to get through the American version of the Spanish Inquisition, Bobby and Stephanie. I brought her to our table and introduced her. I was relieved that my 2 closest friends gave her only about 30 seconds to settle before the interrogation began. "I'm heading to the bar to get you another drink." "You're going to need it," I said with a grin as I got up. Jack's mother, Marcia, approached me at the bar with a big smile. She glanced over at the woman seated at my table with Bobby and Stephanie. "She's quite the firecracker," Marcia said. "But I've heard that you 3 are very protective of each other. Let's see how she handles it." Marcia lingered for a few minutes, telling me more about her friend. At 55, she was a year younger than me and had been married for 15 years before catching her husband cheating. "She gave him a blow below the belt and kicked him out 10 years ago," Marcia explained with a smirk. I returned to the table 5 minutes later to find all 3 women laughing hysterically. For some reason, I didn't feel as comfortable as when I'd left. 2 years later, Callie, our 2-year-old granddaughter, was running through our house with our 2 Labrador retrievers, laughing uncontrollably while her parents sipped iced tea at our kitchen table with 4 of her 6 grandparents. Jack and Eleanor lived about 45 minutes west of us and spent a lot of time at our house with our first grandchild. Jack's parents, Marcia and Tom, admitted they were a little jealous of how much time we spent with Callie. So we invited them to spend a week with us at Christmas so all 6 grandparents and Uncle Roman could enjoy the holidays together. Marcia was easy to convince, as it also gave her the chance to see her best friend, Deb, whom she hadn't seen in a year since Deb and I got married and moved to Santa Fe. Tom, however, was a bit harder to persuade. He admitted to me privately when they arrived that he felt uncomfortable around Bobby and Stephanie because he'd never had close personal contact with women of the wrong orientation before. "They're just regular married people like you and Marcia," I explained. "That's all you need to know. I'd trust either of them with my wallet, my wife, my daughter, my granddaughter, and my life." "I have to admit, they're both very attractive women," Tom said. "I always thought women like that were supposed to be boyish and tough, but that's definitely not the case with them." I could see he was embarrassed as I burst out laughing at his statement. "Oh my God, Tom. Don't overthink it. They're still women. Each of them has more shoes than you and I put together," I replied, still laughing. Deb was nothing like what I thought I needed in a partner. She wasn't calm or laid back at all. I never thought of myself as low energy, but this woman simply couldn't sit still. The first spring she lived with us, I had to plant a garden for her. We spent hours sowing all kinds of vegetables for salads. While she tended to the garden, I jokingly reprimanded her for being part cat, because, as everyone knows, cats are nature's best guardians. Bobby and Stephanie fell in love with her, figuratively, almost as quickly as I did, literally. However, that didn't stop them from warning her before our wedding that they'd crush her into dust if she broke my heart. Deb seemed quite surprised when she told me about this the day after they made their announcement. "I'm pretty sure they weren't joking," I said seriously. "I don't plan on hurting you, but if I ever do, I won't stay here. I'll run so fast it'll make your head spin." "It's called self-preservation," she replied with a grin. Deb eventually convinced Marcia and Tom that Santa Fe was a great place to retire, which they did 8 years later. In fact, they retired earlier than planned when the house next to ours went up for sale. Tom quickly warmed up to Bobby after learning she was a Premier League soccer fan. Bobby supported Arsenal, while Tom was a Crystal Palace fan. I could imagine what it would have been like if we were in an English pub during their matches. There was a bit of lively debate when their two teams faced off. Phrases like "offside" and "take that, old man" weren't uncommon during our gatherings to watch Arsenal and Crystal Palace games, which often ended in draws. Soccer fans are far more intense than baseball fans in America. One summer evening in Santa Fe, I was sitting on the porch swing behind our house, sipping Irish whiskey, and reflecting on how fortunate I was. My eldest granddaughter came out the back door and sat beside me, leaning her slender frame against mine. Once again, I noticed how much she looked like her late grandmother, with her chestnut hair and bright blue eyes. "What are you thinking about, Grandpa?" she asked, using the special name she had for me. "I was thinking about my life and how lucky I am," I replied. "How lucky are you?" she asked. I took a sip of whiskey, trying to figure out how to explain it to a 9-year-old. "Well, sweetheart, you know when something bad happens, but it all works out in the end," I said. She shifted a bit uncomfortably next to me, and when I looked at her face, I could see the wheels turning in her mind. Then a big smile broke out as understanding dawned on her. "Oh. Like when I scraped my knee the other day and Grandma gave me ice cream," she exclaimed excitedly. I smiled at Callie, and she beamed, proud to have gotten the answer right. "Something like that, sweetheart. Something like that."